what has been created by this half-century of massive corporate propaganda is what's called anti-politics. So anything that goes wrong, you blame the government. Well, okay, there's plenty to blame the government about. But the government is the one institution in which that people can change. It's the one institution you can affect by participation without institutional change, right? That's exactly why all the anger and fear is directed against the government. The government has a defect. It's potentially democratic. Corporations have no defect. They're pure tyrannies. So therefore you want to keep corporations invisible and focus all anger on the government. So you don't like something, you know, your wages are going down, blame the government, you know, not blame the guys in the Fortune 500 because you don't read the Fortune 500, you know, thing. You just read what they tell you in the newspapers. So you don't read about the dazzling profits and the stupendous this and the wages going down and so on. All you know is that the bad government's doing something, so let's get mad at the government. It's obvious why big corporations who are fighting the everlasting battle for the minds of men would want that to be the picture you have. If the government is your enemy, and you can, let's say, when 83% of the population think the economic system is inherently unfair, that's supposed to mean they're angry at the government. If you can take that view, then those who run the private institutions are quite well off. Anti-politics is a very scary phenomenon. It can take the form of that it is taking, you know, forming what shouldn't be called militias, because remember, militias are things raised by states. These are just private armies. Forming private armies to defend the country, the people against, you know, the UN forces being brought in the black helicopters by the Council on Foreign Relations to commit genocide, or whatever story you like. Or else it's, you know, fight against Lucifer and Beast 66, who's doing this, that, and the other thing. And that's what, if you take a look across the country, that's what people are worried about and fighting against. Aliens, you know, the devil, the UN forces, the Federal Reserve, I mean, everything except what's real, namely private tyranny, private corporate power, the guys who are listed in the Fortune 500. Well, that's an achievement. That's a propaganda achievement. And while the anger and the fear is real, and it's based on something, and you got to sympathize with it because it is real, when your wages have dropped 25% roughly in, say, 15 years, and, you know, your wife has to work and your kids can't eat and so on and so forth, and you have no future and everything's rotten, you have a lot to be angry about. But people are not focused on what's doing it. That's the difference between the days in which there was a live, functioning labor movement that was organizing these people, exactly these people, to work together to change things.
Libertarian throughout modern European history meant socialist and anarchist. It meant the socialist movement, the workers' movement and the socialist movement, they sort of broke into two branches roughly, one statist, one anti-statist. The statist branch led to Bolshevism and Lenin and Trotsky and so on. The anti-statist branch, which included Marxists, left Marxists, Pannekoek, Rosa Luxemburg, others, it's kind of merged more or less into an amalgam with a big strain of anarchism into what was called libertarian socialism. So libertarian in Europe always meant socialist. Here it means ultra, you know, Ayn Rand or Cato Institute or something like that. But that's a special U.S. usage.
The U.S. sense is quite different. Here every word has taken on the opposite of its meaning elsewhere. So here libertarian means extreme advocate of total tyranny. That's what libertarian means here. It means power ought to be given into the hands of private, unaccountable tyrannies, even worse than state tyrannies, because there the public has some kind of role. The corporate system, especially as it's evolved in the 20th century, is pure tyranny, completely unaccountable. You're inside one of these institutions, you take orders from above, you hand it down below. You're outside the institutions under what the libertarians want. There's nothing you can say. The tyrannies do what they feel like. They're global in scale. I mean, this is the extreme opposite of what's been called libertarian everywhere in the world since the Enlightenment. And that's what's called libertarian here.
But if you have private ownership of the means of production, it means that, first of all, the people, it's not just one person, it's a institution, so you get like, maybe it's a corporation or private business or something. First of all, internally, it's essentially a totalitarian institution, almost necessarily. There's a group at the top, maybe a person or a group, they make the decisions, they give orders, people down the hierarchy get the orders and transmit them. At the very bottom, you get people who are permitted to rent themselves to survive. That's called a job, wage labor. And you get the outside community who's allowed to purchase what you produce, and of course they're very heavily propagandized to make them want to consume it even if they don't. So I mean, that's the nature of the system. It's kind of about as close to totalitarianism as you can imagine.